Hello, everyone. Today is the 18th of June, 2021, and it is day 29 of the 100 Days series. Welcome all, and thank you for watching my R&D 100 Days. As you guys know, R&D 100 Days starts with rethinking, followed by development. And today is day 29, rethinking the carbs, and last week we talked about the insulin, right? We introduction to the insulin, and today we're gonna keep going with diabetes, right? Which is what happened when we have. Actually, we're about to find out, right? Um, so the biggest threat posed by insulin, which naturally is a good thing, but it is now a threat. It is diabetes. Okay, and people think diabetes is incurable, but really it now can be cured, right? So if you search right now to find the definition of diabetes, right? The secret to diabetes is hidden in the definition. So if you have diabetes and you try to do your own research, I think you are going to be completely confused, right? Because there's so many like medical terminology and stuff, right? So let me try to break that down for you. And if you look up the definition of diabetes, it's going to say that it's hyperglycemia, right? We talked about the glycemic um, index before. So glycemic, that's like the rate it turns to sugar, and when the hyperglycemia is when the it's high, that's when you have diabetes. It's when blood sugar is affecting the large vessels, and especially in the heart, right? This can affect the tiny blood vessels of the eye and the kidney, and it's going to affect your nerves, right? So this will create damage to your peripherals. That is, your fingers, your hands, your toes and your feet, right? So what's gonna happen is that they're gonna be numb and cause pain, right? Um, if we look at the causation, what causes this, right, is the insulin, right? And it's a lack of insulin and a decrease of insulin. Okay, since insulin is the hormone that controls the blood sugar, like we remember from last week, um, and that there's not enough blood sugar, right? The blood sugar starts going higher and higher, and then you are now diabetic. You have diabetes, right? So now let's take a look at what controls the insulin. So it's the pancreas. The pancreas, through its beta cells, right? It makes insulin. The insulin goes through the blood. It connects certain receptors to create a function of lowering the blood sugar. And so, what's going on to cause a lack of insulin is either the lack of production of insulin, or on the other side, here a blocked receptor. So the receptor for insulin becomes resistive, and now you have the insulin resistance, like we talked about last time. Okay, so we have the insulin resistance, or we have a pancreas that's not going to be produce the insulin. Now you won't really find this out from the medical textbooks. You will find this out, but not in this form, right? This is a simple form. And you see this little clue here. As the first thing, what happens when you start to have diabetes is you have compensatory hyperinsulinemia, right? Now, what that means is that when the cells start resisting the insulin, the pancreas will compensate by making more insulin. So we still have the function of lowering blood sugar to a certain degree, and so we have the insulin resistance. So the pancreas is going to compensate by making more insulin. Okay, so it's compensating. Um, okay, and then what happens after a period of time? The second thing that happens is that you're no longer able to compensate because the beta cells are now dysfunctional, right? They're exhausted. They're overwhelmed and they stop working, and when this starts to go down, the blood sugar starts to go higher and higher and higher. So the real big question is to figure out what's causing the initial hyperinsulin situation, right? I mean, what's causing this, right? this what's causing this insulin in for a while that we have to look up. That's hyperinsulinemia, okay, which is very interesting. Which you look at Wikipedia, and what causes high incidence is neoplasm, which is a tumor carb malabsorption. Okay, so pancreas cancer, PCOS, and trans fats. That's going to go on to say a result from a variety of diseases that we're talking about here can come from this, right? So sugar in the diet. Now that's like right at the very very end, and there's no real emphasis of this, and it's really nowhere else in the whole page. And so if you're new at this, and you're just listening to me right now and you're reading this, you know the massive connection between consuming sugar and diabetes. You might focus on things right here, right? Like, oh, I have cancer. Maybe I have PCOS, and focus on something that is so rare, and that you might miss this right here, right? Um, if you need to grab maybe a physiology book, right? Um, then perhaps you would find more things out, right? But it's tough to do that nowadays, right? Um, and so I'm just gonna tell you, right? One of the big thing that triggers the insulin is carbohydrates, right? So in order to control this, we have to lower the amount of carbs in the diet, right? But you might be confused if you read this book right here. That's Merck's manual, right? We talked about Merck's manual. And other chapter of diabetes, because it's talking about the diet for diabetes as this diet composition, right? There's no need to stop the flow of carbohydrates, but I'm telling you now that we need to stop the flow of carbohydrates, right? And most diabetics, because they don't stop the flow of carbohydrates. Um, so we just need to manage it with metformin, like everybody else says, and that's bad, right? If we only focus on the medicine, we're going to increase our medicine if we keep eating the carbohydrates, right? You understand that? Um, and they're talking about like mice that they study that has a high fat diet that causes this insulin, the hyperinsulin, right? Um, Now before you start cutting fat and before you start adding more carbs, which don't do that, I'm going to stop you and say um, that that is very flawed, right? Um, so what happens is that when they try to give, when they do this research, they don't do this research well, right? It's not just a high fat diet; they give it a high fat and carbohydrate diet in the mice, right? I mean, no wonder, right? If they told you that, then you would just not eat anything, right? And so before you believe that falseness, right, you're gonna have a much greater impact or spike in insulin when you combine a high fat and a high carb diet. So, of course, it's gonna do that. Um, so do you understand that? And now we're gonna talk about treatment, right? So they say we need to exercise and put more medicine into our bodies, right? And eat like cinnamon as in like the sugar and stuff, right? And eating simple carbohydrates. But actually, don't do that, right? Because simple carbohydrates, they're saying is whole grain, but no. I think simple carbohydrates is like a vegetable, right? Vegetables contain actual simple carbohydrates. Even whole grain bread is processed, right? Um, so why are they talking about this when those are like still carbs are still killing you right now, right? So right now, hopefully that you're not too confused on this, is that the carbohydrates they have a high glycemic index, and they will cause hyperglycemia and hyper insulin. Okay, so that's another reason carbs are high. And see you guys tomorrow for a develop.